Hello to all, welcome to the channel Cloud Knowledge. Today in this video we'll study about connection to an existing database, which is Azure SQL database from SSDT. SSDT is SQL Server Data Tools. So here on the screen you can see SQL Server official documentation by Microsoft, which says that SSDT offers the plethora of features that we can use to work with the database. And if we go down, it has given us the steps to connect to the database. Let's read it. SQL Server Object Explorer SSOX is a tool available in SSDT. SSDT SQL Server Data Tools has sub-tools inside it, among which one is SQL Server Object Explorer in Visual Studio, which we are going to use to connect to the SQL database. It allows you to connect to and manage SQL Server databases within the Visual Studio. So in this video from the Visual Studio, we are going to use SSDT tool, SQL Server Object Explorer, through which we are going to connect to the Azure SQL database. Now the first step is open Visual Studio. Make sure you have installed SSDT along with its appropriate version of Visual Studio. So we have to have Visual Studio. If you don't have it, install it. And then in that Visual Studio installer, you have to have the SQL Server Data Tools. So this is a prerequisite. Now the second step is, after we install the SSDT, it will show up SQL Server Object Explorer in the View menu. Now let me open Visual Studio 2022. We'll go without code here. Now this is without code, and we have to go to the View section to search for SQL Server Object Explorer. Currently we don't have SSDT installed in it, so we can't see SQL Server Object Explorer here, right? So we'll now go to the first option where we have Visual Studio in place, but we have to install SQL Server Data Tools. Now we'll go to the other page under the same documentation of SQL Server 2022 and make sure the Visual Studio is installed as 2022, right? So here is the documentation to install SSDT for Visual Studio. So what is SQL Server Data Tools? It's a set of development tooling for building SQL Server databases and others. With SSDT, you can design and deploy SQL objects with the same project concept as other application development tools. So we'll go down further. The release notes of SSDT and its components are available only for Visual Studio 17, 19 and 22. In our case, we are using 2022. So make sure version is compatible. Then here's the overview given and the other details. Now we'll directly go to the tab here which says install SSDT. This is important because in order to connect to it, we have to install it. Now, if we have Visual Studio 22 or 2019 already installed, we have 22 installed, we can edit the list of workloads to include SSDT. How we have to edit the list of workloads? Here it is given. If you don't have it installed, you can download it. The link is given here. To modify the installed Visual Studio workloads to include SSDT, use the Visual Studio installer. So we have to first launch Visual Studio installer. So go to the search bar, search for installer, and we have this Visual Studio installer. We'll open this installer. It will open up like this, okay, and we'll go back. It says launch it. In the Windows Start menu, search for installer and you'll get it. In the installer, select for the edition of Visual Studio that you want to add SSDT and then click modify. If you have other versions installed, you'll see up here in the installed version. Since we have just 2022 installed, we can see only the one version 2022. Now we have to click on modify. It will open up a page. Meanwhile, we'll go back here and see. Select SQL Server Data Tools SSDT under Data Storage and Processing in the list of workloads. So if we just zoom it, you'll see here when we open modify section, we'll select from the workloads list Data Storage and Processing on the left side, and on the right side we have to check on the SQL Server Data Tools. Here you can see SSDT. Let's just go back here in the installer. In the workload section, we'll go down a little, and here in the other tool set section, we have data storage and processing. We'll click over it. Here on the right side, we can see under data processing and storage SSDT option, which is checked. So we have selected the required SSDT. Now we'll click on modify. It will ask your permission, and then we'll let the installation complete. Now we'll get a prompt whether you want to save your work or not. We want to continue it. You can see downloading and verifying step is in progress. In the meantime, we'll go to the SQL database related details. So here you can see we are using the usual DB which we have been using in the different videos, SQL DB, and the same server for this database to connect to the Visual Studio using the SSDT. And yeah, it is finished. We have the second option called as launch to launch the Visual Studio. So we'll launch it. We'll continue without code. And this time we'll go again to the view section at the top. And we could see here SQL Server Object Explorer option enabled. We'll click over it. And we'll go to the documentation as well. It says open this and then connect to the database server. Select add server option and then enter the connection details. So yeah, we'll go back here, and here we have add SQL server button. We'll click over it. It will open up to fill in the details. Server name. We'll go to the portal, Azure portal, copy the server name, which is server name.database.windows.net. Next is authentication. We'll select SQL Server authentication, the username which we have given while creation of this SQL DB database, and the server, the password, and the database name. It is SQL DB. Let's click on connect. So yeah, we can see on the left side we are connected to SQL DB server. And if your firewall rule or your IP is not added, just add it so that you won't get any error while connection to the SQL server. We'll now open the server here. The database is present inside the SQL DB server. And as we can see here, the SQL DB, we have different tables, right? The same we can access from Visual Studio. So let's expand it. Let's expand the tables as well. Now we can see the tables which are present. Now we can right click on one of the table and view data which is present inside it. So yeah, it has displayed the columns and the rows. So we have seen the data inside this table. We can right click, we can open the script also into the new query window for this. So let's try to open it. So here is the create script for this table. We can query the data also from this table. Come from dbo dot come sum and click on execute. We can see here the results. So yeah, using SQL Server Object Explorer tool within the SSDT, which is installed in the Visual Studio 2022 version, we can connect to Azure SQL database and query the data. Hope you have understood this video. Do let me know in comments if you have any queries. Thank you for watching the video. Happy learning. Bye bye.